Exposed is a presentation of Texas Scorecard and made possible by donations from listeners like you. Visit texasscorecard.com/donate to make a tax-deductible contribution.
According to ancient myth, the Greeks were intent on conquering the Trojans, but they couldn't penetrate the city's walls. The Greeks' siege of Troy lasted a decade. Unwilling to admit defeat, the Greeks constructed a massive wooden horse that concealed 30 of their best soldiers. The rest of the Greeks pushed the massive structure to the gates of the city, proclaimed it a gift, and feigned retreat. The Trojans eagerly accepted this tribute and pulled it into the city. When night fell, the Greeks slid out and attacked the Trojans from within. What if someone had been in the city, warning the Trojans about the horse? What if someone knew the dangers that lurked inside and was trying to awaken their neighbors to the threat? Could Troy have been saved? For the last 2 decades, we've allowed the Chinese Communist Party to enter Texas and the United States. They have infiltrated our country, not invaded it, by using the Trojan horse of our day, the lure of lucrative business agreements and, of course, money. We have heard about the CCP and their frontmen's secretive land deals and their not-so-secretive forays into buying off academic institutions. Those affiliated with the CCP have paid off our politicians from both political parties, and they sought to undermine our businesses. So what can we do about it? Why should we even try? I'm Michael Quinn Sullivan. This is Exposed, Season 3, The Chinese Infiltration of Texas.
It's crazy enough just to allow our biggest enemy to be purchasing our own soil.
We should actively carry out international propaganda battles.
It's crazy to me that a Chinese company could even be able to hire a lobbyist in Austin.
Everyone spies, right? Nobody admits to it. That's sort of the point, right? That just appears to be how these things go.
Hanban is just like the sun. It lights the path to develop Chinese teaching in the U.S.
China has entered really into a total police and digital tyranny.
Most of us have been looking the other way while the Chinese Communist Party has been infiltrating our country. Our neighbors have sold their land to shadowy, foreign-owned companies, but they got a good price. We chafe at so many products being made in China by people forced to work in slave-like conditions, but we like the low price. We're frustrated by politicians and sports figures being too cozy with the totalitarian regime, but we haven't let it influence our voting, our free time, or much of anything else. It hasn't been a priority. But there are those who have been trying to wake us up to the threat of the Chinese Communist Party. To understand the threat the CCP poses here, we must look clearly at what they are doing over there. Few people have been sounding the alarm more loudly than Bob Fu. Born and raised in China, he was a college student in 1989.
Basically, I was inspired by the students in Beijing and then led the first protest in my university and then went to Beijing and joined the protest in the Tiananmen Square. And until, of course, the Communist Party ordered the military with bloody crackdown massacre. So I came to know the Lord after the massacre when I was being treated like a criminal for my leadership in the Tiananmen Square protest.
He became a pastor, where he continued to run afoul of the communist cult. He and his wife first made their way to Hong Kong and then to the United States in 1997. Since then, Pastor Fu has been on the forefront of calling out the abuses of the Communist Party in China. What Americans don't understand, he says, is that
the Communist Party controls everything. It controls your family size, even the time of your pregnancy.
And new technology, rather than liberating the people in China, has become the latest tool of oppression.
China has entered really into a total police and digital tyranny age.
There is nothing altruistic about the CCP's expenditures in the United States or around the world. The Chinese government's Belt and Road policy is part of what Bob Fu calls debt diplomacy. And it's just what it sounds like. Putting other nations and institutions in debt to the Communist Party of China, the CCP will expect something in return. As the Bible states, the borrower is servant to the lender, and Fu believes that the CCP is not content only to enslave the Chinese people.
Their transnational repression has already extended way beyond their shores.
In our second episode, we talked about the CCP's aggressive spending in education, from kindergarten through university. For the CCP, Fu explains that education
is all-party propaganda penetrated deeply from the textbook of social science to even natural science. So we're taught there's no God, and God is just an invention by foreign imperialists to do cultural invasion. So that is part of the education from the primary school, elementary school, all the way to graduate school. And Christianity is the opium of the people, and religion is being regarded as a part of the superstition for the people. So the party and government is everything. Then there's no religious freedom, no freedom of speech.
This explains why the CCP's front group, Hanban, was insistent on controlling the curriculum and the instructors. The public schools in Houston, Hercules Bedford, and so many others were willing to let Beijing set curriculum and hiring for a few extra bucks. Same goes for UT Arlington, Texas A&M, and others. Here's how U.S. Congressman Henry Cuellar puts it.
Higher ed is always looking for new sources of funding, and they need to get more funding from the state. But, it gets very tempting when the Chinese institutes will say, hey, we'll pay for this and do this. So there's a source of funding, and then they provide it in a very benign, type of presentation, and it becomes very tempting. So, this is why, we need to just be alert.
These institutions weren't looking to subvert America or Texas, but they were looking for cash. As with almost every public policy issue, the solutions start in ourselves. If we cannot govern ourselves, how can we possibly govern our government? Just as the Trojans brought that horse into their city, Americans made the infiltration easy for the Chinese Communist Party. Texas Commissioner of Agriculture is rather blunt about it.
I think we ought to put patriotism above profits.
Pastor Fu, though, puts it rather more delicately.
China has been manipulating, exploiting the American and Western system.
That's not to say Pastor Fu sees us as blameless. He says we have
sold our soul, basically, to the money talks greediness of these transnational corporations.
Buying our souls has been good business for China. As the pastor adds,
many corrupted Chinese officials were made rich, and all those who have connections are made rich.
Of course, even those CCP-made moguls don't have everything.
They have billions of assets, but they don't have freedom either, like himself.
It's easy to demagogue the concerns raised in this series and the solutions put forward as old-fashioned, as protectionist, or even racist. That's certainly how the frontmen and shills for the Chinese Communist Party try to frame them. But not so fast, says Miller.
We won't, Toyota and BMW and those to come in and build plants and employ Americans, but we want to partner with them. They need to partner with us and not, just wholesale give them carte blanche access to America.
U.S. Representative Lance Gooden put it this way.
I'm not against all things Chinese. I realize that there is a reasonable need that can be fulfilled at times with doing business with the Chinese. But to just give them the access that we have given them to our daily lives, to our borders, to our military, it's something that I think needs more oversight. I think it needs some reining in.
So how do we begin to rein in the Chinese Communist Party? What we heard repeatedly is that transparency is a big part of any solution to the infiltration being perpetrated by the CCP. Kyle Bass is a businessman who's very concerned about the way the Communist Party of China has been allowed to reach so deeply into the United States. You will recall that in Del Rio, a shadowy company bought land for windmills and solar panels, coming close to Laughlin Air Force Base. As Mr. Bass explains it, the company was
funded with dollars from a CCP-owned institution in America that had dollars in the bank. So you basically had a U.S. corporation funded with U.S. dollars buying U.S. property. It was really difficult to understand who the actual owner was and what kind of sovereignty was represented.
That foreign-owned land comes very close to one of the nation's premier military installations. Because of certain spy technologies that exist, U.S. Senator Ted Cruz has proposed legislation that would trigger the review of wind projects within a certain distance of any military installation.
China, I believe, poses the single greatest geopolitical threat to the United States over the next century.
In Texas, Senate Bill 2116, the Lone Star Infrastructure Protection Act, was passed in 2021. Among other things, the law seeks to impose a sort of transparency on foreign-owned actors. The problem, as Mr. Bass explains, is a lack of enforcement.
I've been trying to understand which law enforcement agency is to enforce 2116 and also review and test compliance.
The answer? Well, no one is quite sure. That's something for Texas legislators to address when they gather in 2023. Before retiring from the legislature this year, James White wanted Texas to prohibit any foreign individual, government, or business from purchasing or acquiring a title to agricultural land in the state of Texas. Believe it or not, Texas wouldn't be the first state to do this. According to Sid Miller,
there's already 6 states that ban this. Texas needs to be one of them. We can stop this at the state level, but ultimately we need it on the federal level. But until the federal government acts on it, we need to act as a state. And this is just one of the stupidest things we allow to happen, in my opinion.
Because this side has a door, and this side doesn't have a door. It didn't just get up and walk away.
Many have commented in recent years on the seemingly unstoppable rise of TikTok, the time-killing social media video platform that's captured the minds of youth around the world. In 2020, the U.S. military banned soldiers from using TikTok, citing national security concerns. Why? The company's ties to the CCP and China's military. Big tech companies in the U.S. collude with China all the time, censoring content from Chinese citizens that their government doesn't want them seeing. And some of those companies are starting to mirror in the U.S. the practices that are common in China. Pastor Bob Fu sees a sadly haunting similarity between what the CCP did to its people and what we are doing to ourselves.
And if you just raise a little bit different voice, then you're censored by Google, of course, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok, and CNN, NPR, all these looks like to me like exactly like in China, the state-owned propaganda system.
We're doing this to ourselves. In this season of Exposed, you heard Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller say we need to put patriotism ahead of profits. Pastor Bob Fu said the West was selling its soul. You heard businessman Kyle Bass explain how we're passing laws without enforcement mechanisms. it's not too late to stop the Chinese Communist Party and thwart their plans for Texas and the United States. The ancient Trojans lost their city only after they let their guard down and pulled the massive horse into their gates. But remember, it was only 30 Greeks who waited inside. If the Trojans had not let themselves become so apathetic, those 30 Greeks would not have been able to lay waste to the city. If the Trojans had remained vigilant in their apparent victory, their city would still stand. Vigilance is something all of us can do. Those concerned about the infiltration of Texas by the Chinese Communist Party should be talking about this issue with their friends, asking questions about land purchases, and calling foul on deals that seem too good to be true. But vigilance doesn't mean much without actual laws requiring actual transparency. Here's the rub. Every watchdog told us that transparency is meaningless without teeth. It's up to the Texas legislature to put those teeth in place and provide clarity as to what agencies of government have the power to take action. The legislature could also prohibit public institutions like colleges, universities, and school districts from entering into agreements with entities affiliated with the CCP or the Chinese military. Similarly, lawmakers could prohibit taxpayer-funded schools from outsourcing curriculum and hiring to CCP-affiliated entities. The Texas legislature could prohibit local governments from giving tax abatements and other incentives to entities affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party and China's government, while the federal Congress could reform the lucrative visa program that grants residency status to investors by prohibiting anyone affiliated with the CCP and the military from participating. Of course, whatever laws and rules are implemented, the best tool for repelling the Chinese Communist Party's infiltration of Texas is an informed and engaged citizenry. It's up to each of us to protect Texas. This series is based on the original Texas Scorecard reporting of Robert Montoya, Kristen Stanchu, Daryl Frost, Emily Wilkerson, and Jesse Connor. I'm your host, Michael Quinn Sullivan.
The Exposed podcast is a production of Texas Scorecard. Texas Scorecard is the leading news outlet for Texas politics. Go to texasscorecard.com today. This episode was written and hosted by Michael Quinn Sullivan, with audio engineering by Drew Cook, editing and production by Walker York.